I met Haley during a laid-back summer cookout at a friend's house. She seemed to stick to the edges of the crowd, like she didn't want to stand out. Something about her quiet vibe caught my attention, and after a couple of beers I figured, why not? I wandered over and introduced myself. I think I startled her a little, but soon enough we were chatting and laughing. She made some joke that, in my slightly tipsy state, I found absolutely hilarious. My laugh was loud enough to draw a few glances our way, which made her cheeks turn red. That just made her seem even sweeter to me. Honestly, from that first meeting, it felt like we were meant to be. Haley and I clicked so quickly that it didn't take long before we started dating. At first, it was perfect, almost like something out of a movie. We went for scenic drives, had picnics at the park, and even spent lazy weekends binging her favorite shows. But a few months in, things started to shift. Haley had this anger that came out of nowhere. It wasn't the quiet kind of frustration most people have. It was explosive. If I forgot something small, like picking up bread, or spent too much time chatting with a coworker, she'd lose it. I tried to be patient, thinking maybe she was dealing with something she didn't want to talk about. But I'm not the kind of guy who will just take being yelled at or blamed over nothing. The breaking point came during a nasty argument. We both said things we shouldn't have, and it became clear that we weren't going to work. After that, she packed up her things and walked out of my apartment. The silence she left behind felt heavy, almost unnatural. I found myself dwelling on our time together, replaying everything in my head. To deal with the loneliness, I turned to alcohol. I know it's not healthy, but that night, it seemed like the only way to get through the ache. I ended up crashing on the couch with the TV still playing some random reruns. The next morning, I woke up feeling groggy, like I hadn't slept at all. The sunlight coming through the blinds hit me in the face, but something about the room felt off. My head was pounding, and I didn't want to open my eyes right away. The sunlight creeping through my eyelids told me it was probably early, maybe around 6 in the morning. I groaned, thinking I'd need to drag myself to the bathroom soon, but when I finally opened my eyes, I froze. Haley was sitting in the armchair across from me. She wasn't just sitting, she was holding a big kitchen knife, resting it lightly on her lap. For a second, I thought I was still dreaming. Maybe it was some strange alcohol-fueled nightmare, but her face said otherwise. Her eyes were cold, empty. My throat went dry as I croaked out, asking her what she was doing here. She didn't answer right away, just kept staring at me with that blank expression. Her hands gripped the knife tightly, like it was the only thing tethering her to the moment. Finally, she broke the silence. I've been sitting here all night, and I really thought about doing it. Her voice was calm, like she was sharing something casual, but the weight of her words hit me like a truck. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe. She stood up slowly, placed the knife on the coffee table with a loud clatter that made me flinch, smoothed out her dress, and walked straight out the front door without another word. I just sat there, stunned and too scared to move. What the hell had just happened? Should I call the police? What would I even say? Hi, my ex broke into my apartment, sat with a knife watching me sleep, and said she considered killing me. Legally, I wasn't even sure she'd done anything wrong. She still had a key, something I stupidly hadn't asked for when she left, so technically she didn't break in, and thinking about killing someone isn't exactly a crime. But she scared the hell out of me, no question about that. First thing I did was head to my apartment office and request a lock change. I told them I had an ex with a key and needed it done ASAP. Of course, I had to cover the cost, but honestly, it felt like a small price to pay. I also texted her sister, trying to explain what happened. I told her about our fight, about Haley showing up with a knife, and how she clearly needed help. Her sister didn't reply. In fact, I'm pretty sure she blocked me after that. But at least someone else knew what had gone down just in case. It's been about a year now, and I haven't seen or heard from Haley since that morning. The memory hasn't faded, though. I can't bring myself to sleep on the couch anymore. Every night, I make sure to sleep in my bedroom. And I lock not just the front door, but the bedroom door too. I don't care if it feels paranoid. That moment was the closest I've ever come to dying, and I'm sure that if she'd been pushed just a little harder, she would have done it. This happened several years back when I was younger and far less cautious. Before diving in, I want to say I've learned from this. These days, I'm in a stable, long-term relationship where I've finally understood my worth and grown a lot as a person. At the time, I was starting my second year of college. I'm a plus-sized woman and was the type of person who kept her nose in her books during high school. I had a good circle of friends and went to parties here and there, but school always came first. Dating wasn't really something I paid attention to, partly because I thought it would distract me and partly because, let's face it, nobody seemed interested. Most of my guy friends were either into other guys or were already dating my friends. It wasn't until college that I started wondering if maybe it was time to let someone else into my life. About a week before classes began, I headed to the mall with some friends to pick up a few new outfits. I wasn't overly concerned about fashion, just needed a few things to get through the first week. Back then, I had a driver's license but no car, which meant getting around relied on walking, public buses, or friends willing to give me a lift. That day, I had no choice but to take the bus. I was on the last leg of my trip, staring out the window of the crowded bus, when a guy stepped on. He looked a bit older than me, maybe mid-20s, and he was fit, like he spent time at the gym. The bus was packed since it was the mall route, and the only open seat was next to me. Without hesitation, he sat down. I stayed focused on my phone, texting a friend, and tried not to notice him. When my texting ended, I found myself in an awkward situation. My phone was old, the kind with a slide-out keyboard, and didn't have internet or games. I had no excuse to keep looking down. Still, I avoided glancing his way until a sudden shift in the bus's movement made me accidentally meet his gaze. That's when he smiled and told me I looked beautiful. His compliment caught me off guard. He mentioned how pale my skin was and how it stood out against the color of my dress. I wasn't sure how to feel. Flattered but uneasy. Still, I smiled politely and answered when he started a conversation. Being noticed felt nice, but I stayed cautious. I even gave him a fake name when he asked. The ride ended at the mall, and he asked for my number. I told him I wasn't comfortable giving it out and brushed it off, saying maybe we'd see each other again. I spent the day shopping and laughing with my friends, but his words lingered in the back of my mind. My mom had arranged to pick me up at a shopping center near our house, but I still needed the bus to get there. As I settled into my seat, guess who got on? The same guy from earlier. I won't lie, I felt a weird little flutter when I saw him. When he sat beside me again, I was kind of flattered. We ended up chatting for the whole ride back, and just before his stop, he asked for my number again. This time, I gave him my Facebook instead. When he realized I'd used a fake name the first time, he actually laughed and called me clever for being cautious. I felt pretty secure giving him my Facebook since it didn't have much personal info or photos. I mainly used it for school projects and chatting with friends, so I wasn't too worried about sharing it. That night, he started messaging me, and we talked online for a few weeks. Eventually, I felt comfortable enough to give him my actual phone number, and we set up a time to meet face-to-face. When we finally met in person, it went surprisingly well. We chose a busy coffee shop. I made sure we both paid for ourselves, and at the end, we went our separate ways. I even found myself looking forward to seeing him again. We made plans for a second date, but it wouldn't be for another week. September had me juggling school and other responsibilities, and I worried about making him wait. Luckily, he seemed pretty understanding and didn't pressure me. The following week, he proposed a movie night, suggesting he could pick me up. I politely declined and insisted on meeting him at the theater instead. We were still getting to know each other, and I wasn't ready for him to know where I lived. Honestly, I'm so glad I made that call. The theater was in a plaza just a short drive from my house, so it felt like a safe compromise. We went to see Paranormal Activity 2 Hui. I've always loved horror movies, but I find them more entertaining than scary. I couldn't stop laughing during the film. It was just too ridiculous. But every time I glanced at him, he seemed tense, like he wasn't enjoying himself. It gave me a weird vibe, but I shrugged it off. Maybe he was just trying to seem brave since I was clearly unfazed. When the movie ended, he dropped a bombshell. Apparently, he'd been hoping I'd get so scared during the movie that I'd cling to him for comfort. That was his big plan, to create an excuse for things to get more intimate. Then he admitted that the dinner plans we'd discussed weren't real. His goal had been to convince me to go back to his place. I was completely thrown off. Trying to stay calm, I pretended to get an urgent call from my mom and told him I had to leave right away. He asked if I could give him a ride since he'd walked to the theater. Against my better judgment, I agreed, and we drove to his house. It became clear he didn't have a car of his own and had planned to borrow a friend's vehicle to pick me up. What I found even stranger was that he lived only a short walk from the theater. I pulled up in front of his house to drop him off, and as he got out, he leaned in for a kiss. I instinctively tried to turn my head, but he grabbed my face gently, yet firmly, to stop me. When it was over, he started talking about how much he loved me and how he couldn't wait for us to spend every moment together. I was stunned and honestly grossed out. I forced a nervous laugh, said goodbye, and reached for the gear shift to leave. Before I could back out of his driveway, he tried to open my door, but thankfully I'd locked it earlier. My window was cracked open just a little, and he tried to push it down with his fingers. When I didn't budge, he leaned in to kiss the glass. That's when I decided to get the hell out of there. The drive home was a blur. My stomach felt tight, and I couldn't shake how creepy the whole thing had been. Over the next few days, his texts started ramping up in weirdness. What started as sweet messages turned into intense proclamations of love. He talked about how he couldn't wait to marry me, how our future kids would be the most beautiful children ever. It had been barely a month, and here he was planning a whole life with me. I confided in a friend, showing her the texts and explaining the situation. She gave me a big hug and shared a similar experience she'd gone through. Her advice was straightforward. If I was done, I didn't owe him anything. Just because he made the first move didn't mean I was obligated to stick around. Hearing that lifted a huge weight off my shoulders. Right then, I decided to end things and messaged him to break it off. The rest of the day, I tried to focus on classes, thinking the hardest part was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. My phone started blowing up with messages. At first, they seemed almost sad. He wanted to know what went wrong, what he had done to scare me away. But when I didn't reply immediately, the tone shifted. He began threatening to kill himself, saying I was his soulmate and he couldn't live without me. By the time I finished class, there was a mountain of missed calls, texts, and voicemails waiting for me. I called him back, trying to keep things calm. I explained that I didn't feel the same connection he did, and that it was better to end things now rather than later. I told him he needed to talk to someone about how he was feeling, and that ending his life wasn't the answer. This only unleashed a fresh wave of messages. The sweet words were gone, replaced with insults and blame. He called me names, accused me of leading him on, and said his death would be my fault. When he started calling over and over again, I had no choice but to turn my phone off entirely. That night, I told my mom everything. She didn't judge me for keeping it to myself at first. Instead, she focused on supporting me, though she was furious about his erratic behavior. She was uneasy with how quickly things escalated, especially since her job in criminal law exposed her to some truly dark stories. Following her advice, I messaged him one final time. I told him that his choices and behavior weren't my responsibility, and that my decision to end things was final. I made it clear that I wouldn't tolerate the way he was talking to me and warned him that if he kept this up, I'd have no choice but to involve the police. Unfortunately, this only made things worse. His texts kept pouring in, full of threats of self-harm, and when I stopped replying, his focus shifted. He began threatening me, and worse, my family. He said he'd find me, kill me, and then take his own life. Panicked, I removed him from Facebook and told all my friends to avoid sharing any of my personal details with anyone, no matter who asked. What gave me a little comfort was knowing he didn't know my exact address. But I lived close to that plaza, and my family and I went there often. I couldn't shake the fear that he might see me one day and follow me home. The worst part was that he lived just 5 minutes away. It was entirely possible to bump into him by chance anywhere in our neighborhood. I started staying inside as much as I could, only leaving when I had no other choice. His messages became more intense. At first he focused on me, but then he started mentioning my family. The moment he threatened to harm my sister, something inside me snapped. I realized I couldn't let this continue. I picked up the phone and called him. The second he answered, he tried to sound sweet, like nothing had happened. But I wasn't about to let him manipulate me. I cut him off immediately. I told him that threatening me was one thing, but dragging my family into it crossed a line. I called him out for being a terrible person and honestly, worse things than that. I'll admit, I said some things I'm not proud of, but in that moment, I needed to stand my ground. I ended the call by making it crystal clear. I was done. If he so much as tried to contact me again, I'd go straight to the police. And just so he understood I wasn't bluffing, I reminded him that I knew where he lived and it wouldn't be hard to report him. That seemed to do the trick. He hung up, and after that, he never tried to reach me again. For weeks, I stayed cautious. I avoided the plaza entirely, and my family did the same. I kept all the texts as evidence, just in case, and even held onto my old phone when I upgraded, making sure not to lose anything. About a year and a half later, one of my friends, against my protests, decided to look him up on Facebook. She told me he'd moved to another town, so I no longer needed to worry about running into him. But what she said next made my stomach churn. She found pictures of him with his new fiancée, and the woman could have been my twin. I'm not exaggerating. Her face, her hair, her whole look was eerily similar to mine. Worse, they'd started dating not long after I cut ties with him. The guy who claimed I was the love of his life, the one who made threats that still haunt me, had moved on to someone who could have been my doppelganger. All I can say is this: let's hope we never cross paths again. When I first met him, let's call him Logan, I was just starting my junior year. He was quiet, a bit mysterious, and I fell for him fast. Back then, I thought he was the one. Insane to think I actually married him just days after graduating high school. We were that cliché. Young and in love, or so I believed. Looking back, there were signs everywhere. I ignored them all because I was desperate to prove I could handle life. The night before our wedding, I sat with my mom to sort out final details. Mom, who's the kindest person I know, saw the hesitation in my eyes. I asked her, half joking, if she'd hate me for backing out. Her laugh was gentle, warm, and she thought I was just nervous. I couldn't bring myself to tell her what I really felt, so I swallowed my fear and smiled. Years later, when I finally opened up, she was devastated that she hadn't noticed sooner. No one knew the truth then, because I made sure they didn't. I was his biggest supporter, a walking cover-up for his behavior. It only took hours after the ceremony for his true colors to flash again. We were supposed to be starting our honeymoon, but instead, he hurled me out of his truck in my parents' driveway, yelling he wanted a divorce before screeching off. I stood there, stunned in my white dress. I ran inside, tears blinding me, trying to explain everything to my dad. He stared at me, completely lost, asking over and over what had happened. Between sobs, I managed to say, "He left me." My dad's rage flickered before he calmed himself, trying to piece together a logical explanation. Maybe it was a bad joke, he said. Then Logan's truck whipped back into the driveway, and Dad, smiling, said, "See? He's back." I wiped my face, pretending everything was fine. I told them it was all some big misunderstanding, though inside, I was crumbling. I had to keep them in the dark because if they knew the truth, they'd hate me for staying. A few months later, things seemed better, mostly because Logan was away for military training. When we talked, he was kinder, and I convinced myself he'd changed. Soon, though, it was time for me to pack up and move to Fort Hood with him. I could tell my parents were uneasy, but they didn't push, until my mom accidentally read a nasty message from him on my phone. Her tears hit me harder than anything he'd ever done. She begged me not to leave. I told her he wasn't always like that, just lonely and stressed. But deep down, I knew better. I lied through my teeth that day. Mom didn't buy it, not really, but she knew I wasn't going to back down. I've always been that way, stubborn to a fault. A few weeks after moving to Fort Hood, though, I realized how dangerous he truly was. It was Thanksgiving when things really unraveled. My family had called to check in, their voices cheerful as they wished us a happy holiday. I didn't think much of it as I hung up, but the moment my phone hit the table, Logan started in. He barked that I needed to cut ties with them, saying they weren't my family anymore. He was. I laughed, thinking he had to be kidding. He wasn't. Without warning, he grabbed our wedding glasses, the ones we'd custom ordered, and hurled them at me. Glass shattered everywhere. I froze, stunned, but my instincts took over. I grabbed a broom and started sweeping up the mess, hoping to de-escalate things. But Logan wasn't finished. As I swept, he picked up picture frames and started throwing those too. The shattering glass on the floor felt like a cruel mirror of what was happening inside me. Any love I had for him was obliterated in that moment. That night, something broke in me. He wasn't my partner anymore. He was just a cruel man I was trapped with. The next few weeks were a blur of depression. He seemed to thrive on my misery, finding new ways to break me down every chance he got. He'd bait me, push me, just to watch me react. 2 months later, it all boiled over again. He exploded one night because the washer and dryer delivery got delayed. He stomped around, muttering nonsense about conspiracies and incompetence. His paranoia was off the charts, accusing the company of targeting him because he was in the military. He demanded I call them to fix it, grabbing me by the arm and forcing me onto the couch. Standing over me, he hissed instructions, warning me not to mess it up. When I stammered something, trying to explain that I didn't even make the original call, he flew into a full-blown tirade. "They're messing with me because of who I am," he snapped, pacing the room. Then, without warning, he shifted the blame to me. "You probably planned this with them," he snarled. "You love making me look like a fool, don't you?" He stormed out of the room, leaving me frozen on the couch, heart pounding. From the bedroom, he kept shouting, his voice dripping with venom. "You're useless, a stupid, good-for-nothing bitch. Is that all you are? Just a whiny, pathetic mess who ruins everything she touches?" His words hit like punches, each one harder than the last. I sat there staring at the floor, trying to keep myself from falling apart completely. But deep down, I knew he wasn't done yet. He never was. "All you ever do is yell at me," I said, my voice trembling. I stared into his eyes, but what I saw wasn't human. It was like looking into a bottomless void, something cold and lifeless that still haunts me every time I close my eyes. Then, without warning, Logan lunged at me. Broad daylight, curtains wide open, neighbors outside mowing lawns or walking their dogs. He didn't care. He grabbed me and slammed me into the wall, his hands closing around my neck. I struggled, but the edges of my vision blurred to black. Just as I thought I'd pass out, he let go. For a split second, I thought it was over. Then, with terrifying strength, he grabbed me again and threw me to the floor. I don't know if I blacked out or if my mind just tried to shield me from the horror of it all. But my memories of that moment come in flashes. I remember him gripping my shoulders, slamming me down repeatedly onto the hard wooden floor. My screams ripped through the air, desperate and raw, but nobody outside came to help. "Somebody please call the police!" I screamed over and over, hoping that someone, anyone, would hear me. But all I got in return was the sound of my own voice echoing back at me. I knew I had to save myself, so I bolted for the bathroom and locked the door behind me. My hands shook as I fumbled to call my mom. I just needed her voice, needed her to anchor me. When she answered, I couldn't even get the words out before Logan's pounding fists shook the door. He screamed at me to unlock it, his voice venomous, calling me every foul name you can imagine. I heard her confusion through the phone as my dad's voice joined in, asking what the hell was going on. Mom had put me on speaker like she always did so my whole family could talk to me. But this time, They didn't get the usual happy chat. They heard me sobbing, begging for my life. Then, all at once, it stopped. The pounding, the yelling, everything. My mom's voice was frantic, trying to get me to answer her. But I just sat there, curled up on the bathroom floor, crying into the phone. I whispered that I knew I needed to leave him, but I had to do it carefully. If I didn't, I might not survive. When I finally crept out of the bathroom, Logan was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV like nothing had happened. That emptiness in his eyes chilled me to the bone. But I knew this was my moment. This was when I had to start planning my way out. Days later, at 2 a.m., I made my move. The keys to my Pontiac were sitting on the kitchen table. Logan was passed out in the bedroom, the one I hadn't been allowed to sleep in for weeks. I snuck out of the guest room that had become my prison, my heart racing with every step toward the front door. Quietly but quickly, I slipped outside, got in the car, and took off. I drove for 9 hours straight, only stopping once for gas in Dallas. Every mile that disappeared in my rearview mirror made me feel lighter, freer. By the time I crossed into my home state, I could finally breathe again. I'm free now. The scars he left, some visible, most not, are still there. But I've healed enough to know I made the right choice. If I had stayed, I have no doubt I'd be buried 6 feet under. To Logan, wherever you are, I hope I never see your face again. Not long ago, my ex and I decided to split up. We agreed it was the best thing since things had started feeling forced. The whole thing lasted about 5 weeks. She was fiery, always quick to anger, and that's one thing I definitely didn't mind leaving behind. A couple of weeks later, just when I thought it was all behind me, I got a text from her one evening. She said she needed to see me and asked me to meet her at this small park nearby. We used to go there sometimes. It was pretty, with a quiet spot right by the woods. I had no idea what she wanted, but part of me thought she might want to patch things up. I wasn't interested in getting back together, so I spent the next half hour figuring out how to say that without sounding harsh. Around 9:45, I left my place and walked to the park. The night was perfect, not too hot, with just a slight breeze. But when I got there, the place was darker than I remembered. Shadows from the trees stretched across the paths, making it hard to see. I sent her a text to say I'd arrived and asked where she was. She said she was by one of the picnic tables at the edge of the woods. I headed that way, but when I got there, I didn't see her. I called out her name. No answer. Feeling uneasy, I pulled out my phone to call her. That's when I heard the crunch of leaves behind me. Turning around, I froze. A huge guy in a ski mask stepped out from the trees. I'm not a small guy. I'm 6 feet tall. But this man towered over me. He had to be at least 6'5" and built like a linebacker. As he moved closer, my instincts kicked in, and I turned to run. I barely made it a few steps before he tackled me hard, slamming me into the dirt. I struggled, but he was way too strong. He hit me several times, leaving me stunned and gasping for air. While I was still trying to recover, he yanked my wallet, keys, and phone right out of my pockets. As if that wasn't enough, he punched me a few more times before sprinting back into the trees. I lay there for what felt like forever, aching and dazed, before I finally managed to stagger to my feet. Luckily, I wasn't seriously hurt, just battered and bruised. Since my keys and phone were gone, I had no choice but to knock on my neighbor's door. They let me in and called the police. Later that night, I had to get a locksmith to break into my own house. When the cops tracked down my ex, it turned out she'd planned the whole thing. She'd used me as bait to set up the robbery with that guy. Both of them were arrested, but my stuff was gone for good. Replacing everything was a headache, but what stayed with me most was the realization of how much worse it could have been. I never thought reconnecting with an old high school crush would turn into such a mess. But here I am, wishing I could undo the last few months. If anyone invents a time machine, let me know. I'll pay you in cash. No questions asked. Sorry, that's my nervous humor kicking in. A couple of months ago, I was scrolling through Facebook when I saw a face I hadn't seen in years. His name was Nate. Back in high school, he was my boyfriend during sophomore and junior years. We were young and clueless, and when we broke up, it felt like the end of the world. But life went on, and we both moved forward. I sent him a friend request, and he accepted almost right away. He even said he'd been thinking about me recently, which was kind of sweet. I joked about Facebook reading his mind, and we started catching up, swapping stories about how our lives had changed. It turned out we were in similar places, both single, no kids, just working on our careers. We met up for coffee twice, chatting about random things. It felt good having Nate back in my life, even just as a friend. Before we dated, he'd been a solid friend, and we'd always had a good time together. I started to enjoy having him around again, like a piece of the past that didn't feel so distant anymore. Then Shauna appeared. Out of nowhere, she sent me a friend request. When I clicked on her profile, I noticed a bunch of photos of her and Nate with hearts and sappy captions. That threw me off because Nate had made it clear he wasn't seeing anyone. So I asked him about her. He said she was an ex from about 2 years ago, and they hadn't been in touch much since. That made it even stranger, given her profile seemed to show otherwise. I shrugged it off, figuring it wasn't worth stressing over. I accepted her request anyway, thinking it might be fun to tease Nate about his embarrassing secrets if she spilled any. It was all meant to be lighthearted. At least, that's what I told myself. That turned out to be a huge mistake. At first, it was just little things. Shauna liking my recent posts, then scrolling back and hearting pictures I'd posted years ago. It felt harmless at first, but quickly spiraled into something else. Soon, she started messaging me. Her first message was a casual question about Nate and me back in high school. I told her the truth. It was a teenage fling, and we were just kids who thought we were in love until life taught us better. But then she started pushing. She asked prying, deeply personal questions, like how far we'd gone in our relationship. It was bizarre, but I tried to laugh it off and told her I wasn't comfortable talking about that. Instead of letting it go, she doubled down, asking detailed, inappropriate questions about specific things we might have done together. I was disgusted. I told her I wasn't continuing the conversation and warned that if she kept going, I'd block her. That's when she crossed a line I didn't even know existed. She sent me a photo of herself and Nate. Let's just say it was explicit. I blocked her immediately, feeling sick. I told Nate everything. I shared every ugly detail of what she said and the picture she sent. He was horrified and apologized over and over. He explained that they'd ended things on what he thought were good terms. She wanted kids, and he didn't. And that had been the breaking point. He told me he'd talk to her and find out what her problem was. I really thought that would be the end of it. I wanted it to be the end of it. A week later, I was at a cafe downtown, catching up with my best friend Megan. We were mid-conversation when someone slid into the empty chair next to me. I glanced up, ready to tell whoever it was to shove off, but my words caught in my throat. It was Shauna. Her hair was a completely different color, but her face was unmistakable. My stomach dropped as she leaned in, giving me this unhinged grin. "Hi, Bella," she said cheerfully, as if we were old friends. Megan looked as uneasy as I felt, but I managed to stammer out, "Oh, hi, Shauna." She smirked, leaning back in the chair like she owned the place. "I was afraid you wouldn't recognize me without Nate on top of me," she said with a laugh, and I felt my face go red. I told her flatly that we didn't have anything to talk about and she should leave. But she waved me off like I was the one acting crazy. She launched into a bizarre rant about how Nate was her soulmate and they were destined to be together forever. Her voice was calm, like she was stating a fact, but her eyes told a different story. I couldn't think of anything else to say, so I just muttered, "Okay?" Shauna leaned in closer, her grin growing wider. "No, it's not okay, Bella," she said, her tone shifting from fake sweetness to something colder. "You're in my way. Nate left me because of you. He thinks he still loves you, but he doesn't. He belongs with me. We're meant to be together, and we're going to have the family he's always wanted. Before I could even process her words, she grabbed my hand on the table, squeezing it tightly. Her eyes locked onto mine, and she said calmly, "If you try to get between us, I'll kill you." Then, without missing a beat, she turned to Megan, sitting frozen next to me, and added, "I'll kill you too. Witnesses aren't good for anyone." Neither of us could speak. We just stared at her in stunned silence, not believing what we just heard. Shauna tilted her head slightly and gave a curt nod like she just solved a simple problem. "Good," she said brightly. "I think we're all on the same page now. Well, I'll be going. Bye." And with that, she got up and strolled out of the cafe as if she hadn't just threatened 2 lives in broad daylight. I was shaking. Megan looked just as pale as I felt. My mind was spinning. Who was this woman? How did she know where I was? It was a random Saturday morning. I hadn't told anyone where I'd be. The idea that she'd tracked me down so easily made my skin crawl. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and messaged Nate. I told him everything, how Shauna had just shown up, how she'd threatened me and Megan, and how I thought it would be safer if we just stayed away from each other for now. He was horrified and apologized over and over, but there wasn't much he could do. He promised he'd handle it and look into filing for a restraining order. He also said he didn't understand why she thought he still loved me. He didn't. There was no way he'd go back to her, and he swore he'd make that clear. We agreed it was best not to talk for a while, at least until Shauna was out of the picture. That was 2 months ago. I haven't seen or heard from her since, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't still terrified. Every time I hear a knock at the door or see a notification on Facebook, my stomach knots up. The fear hasn't left me, not really. Shauna was obsessed with Nate, with this fantasy of a life they were never going to have, and somehow my existence was the thing standing in her way. If I've learned anything from all this, it's that some things are better left in the past. Sometimes digging up old memories doesn't just bring nostalgia, it brings nightmares. I turned 20 this year, but this happened when I was 16. It was my first year as a junior, and I had just made my very first Twitter account. That account is long gone now, deleted because of this experience. I didn't tell anyone about it. Not family, not classmates, not even the few people I sometimes chatted with online. My profile picture wasn't of me, just a random anime avatar, and I didn't share any real photos. I lived in a small town near Chicago, but I didn't write about my location either. My tweets were pretty dull, and I had maybe 25 followers, tops. It was late October, just getting chilly. That night, I got a weird direct message. The account had about 300 followers, and the message went something like this. "Hey, I'm Dan. I just turned 18. I'll be moving to Aurora soon and going to high school there. Are you from around there? Just trying to meet new people." Aurora was where I lived. My heart skipped, because nowhere on my profile did I say where I was from. But then I remembered a tweet I made a couple of weeks back about missing my bus and jokingly cursing the Aurora transit system. I figured that's how he guessed it. His age didn't seem strange to me since I was ahead in school and often around older students. Dan seemed polite, so I replied. I confirmed I lived there and told him I went to the local high school. At first, we had a pretty ordinary conversation about school. What the cafeteria food was like, which teachers were cool, that kind of thing. But as the night dragged on, his tone shifted. He started asking personal stuff, like how far I lived from school, whether I was in a house or apartment, and if my parents were around a lot. He even asked if I had siblings and whether we were often home alone. Those questions made my skin crawl. I dodged them, pretending I didn't see the messages. He didn't press, which honestly made it creepier. If he had pushed, I might have blocked him right then. The next day, he messaged again. We kept talking, mostly about harmless things like movies and music, but he kept sliding in those personal questions. I tried asking about him too, and he always had answers that seemed straightforward enough. Still, I refused to tell him anything about my house or my family. Something about it just didn't feel right. Our conversation stretched over a few weeks. During that time, I started to feel something for him. Dan was sweet, thoughtful, and so easy to talk to. Everything I wanted but didn't think I deserved. I'd been dealing with bullies for years, and honestly, I latched onto kindness wherever I found it. Trusting people too quickly was one of my flaws, but I didn't see it that way back then. In the US, schools get a Thanksgiving break around November, and the day before classes were set to start again, Dan dropped a bombshell. He had finally moved in with his mom and would be starting at my high school. He asked if we could meet up during the morning break. My heart practically soared. I told him we could meet in the main hall. It's big and open, and everyone hangs out there. But Dan hesitated. He said he didn't want to look lost trying to find me in a crowd and suggested somewhere more private. I figured that made sense and offered to meet him in one of the third-floor bathrooms. Those were always empty during breaks because we weren't allowed to hang out there. It felt a bit strange, but being at school made me feel safe. That Monday, I put extra effort into how I looked. I wore my favorite outfit and even added a little makeup. When the morning break came, I rushed up to the third floor, nerves and excitement making my heart race. When he arrived, it was actually him. Dan wasn't a catfish. He looked just like his profile picture. Maybe a little older, though. I figured he might have been lying about his age and was probably closer to 20. I didn't care. I was just relieved he wasn't someone else entirely. We hit it off instantly. He made me laugh, and for the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely happy. At the end of the break, he asked if I wanted to grab lunch at a fast food place nearby. I turned him down because I didn't have money on me and didn't like the idea of him paying. He seemed disappointed but quickly suggested walking me home after school instead. I explained I usually took the bus, but he was welcome to walk me to the stop. He accepted, though his face dropped a little. That day set a pattern. Every morning we met in the third-floor bathroom during break, and every afternoon he walked me to the bus stop. It felt sweet, like our own little routine. But looking back, some things didn't add up. I never saw him in the cafeteria or the hallways, and I'd assumed our schedules just didn't line up. With over 1,500 students at school, it didn't seem impossible. This routine went on for over a month, right into mid-December. On the 13th, I made the mistake of telling him about my evening plans, or lack thereof. My dad was out of town for work, my brother was staying at a friend's house, and my sister was away on a school trip. My mom, who worked long hours, wouldn't be home until late. I mentioned offhandedly how quiet and lonely the house would be. At the time, I didn't see any harm in saying it. That evening, like always, Dan walked me to the bus stop. We chatted a bit while waiting for the bus to arrive. When it finally did, I waved goodbye as I climbed aboard. The bus wasn't crowded, and I settled into a seat near the back, headphones in. 2 stops later, I got off. It was dark, almost 6 p.m. in the middle of December, and the air felt colder than usual. But as I started walking, something gnawed at me. A bad feeling crept in, making the hairs on my arms stand up. The feeling in my gut was heavy, like a stone weighing me down, and I couldn't shake the sense that someone was watching me. I paused my music but kept my earbuds in, hoping it would look like I wasn't paying attention. That decision might have saved my life. My neighborhood was quiet, eerily so at night, with dim streetlights and no clear view of the main road where the bus stopped. The silence made everything sharper, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps. Someone was behind me. They weren't rushing, just keeping pace, but the deliberate rhythm told me everything I needed to know. I tried not to panic. Slowly, I reached into my pocket for my keys, keeping my movements as subtle as possible. The moment my fingers closed around them, I bolted. I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they might give out. But somehow, I made it. I fumbled with the lock, and just as I threw the door shut behind me, I heard the footsteps stop outside. Heart pounding, I deactivated the alarm system, the chirp of it confirming I was completely alone in the house. I peered through the glass pane by the door. Why I didn't use the peephole, I'll never know. And there he was, Dan. Standing just a few feet from my front door, his face twisted into a look that froze the blood in my veins. He wasn't here to talk. Somehow he must have followed me, maybe even drove behind the bus. I had been so focused on walking home that I never noticed a car. For reasons I still don't understand, I didn't call the police. I was frozen, my brain trying to process what was happening. We locked eyes, and for what felt like an eternity, neither of us moved. When I finally snapped out of it, I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find. By the time I returned to the door, he was there too, pounding on it. Each hit made the glass shudder, and for a terrifying second, I thought it might shatter. I pressed my weight against the door, praying it would hold. His kicks became more aggressive, and I could feel each one reverberate through the frame. Time felt like it stretched forever. Then, just as suddenly as it started, he stopped. I heard him move around the side of the house, banging on the shutters, testing each window. Eventually, he came back to the front door, his expression now furious. But before he could do anything else, headlights from a car lit up the driveway. My neighbor was pulling in, and Dan bolted, likely assuming it was my mom coming home early. When I got back to my room, I checked my phone. My Twitter was flooded with messages from Dan. Hundreds of them, all sent in a panic, begging to talk, apologizing, making excuses. I blocked him immediately. His account disappeared shortly after, but then new ones started popping up. Every time I blocked one, another would take its place. Each had a random string of numbers in the username, but they all started with a D. The messages became hateful, vulgar insults that didn't make sense, but they came in waves, dozens at a time. I couldn't keep up, so I finally deleted my account. Afterward, I tried to piece together what had happened. I asked around at school, talking to people in my grade and even a few seniors. Nobody had heard of Dan. Not one person recognized his name or his description. That's when it hit me. He had never been a student at my school. The reason I never saw him in the hallways or cafeteria wasn't because our paths didn't cross. It was because he didn't belong there. Even now, years later, I have no idea what Dan wanted from me or how far he might have gone that night if things had played out differently. I just know that I never want to find out. Dan, if you're still out there, let's never meet again. When I was 12 and later 17, something strange happened to me that still sticks in my mind. A little about me to set the stage. I'm a pansexual woman, and I've been openly out since I was 16. Back then, meeting people online was a regular thing. This was when MySpace and My Yearbook were everywhere. I was the kind of teenager who had profiles on multiple sites, and it wasn't unusual for me to drop an account and make a new one, sometimes on the same platform, sometimes not. On my first My Yearbook account when I was 12, I got to know a girl I'll call Chelsea. Chelsea was sweet. We didn't talk often or about anything big, just casual chats. When I moved on to a different account, I didn't bother keeping up with most of the people I'd talked to. Fast forward to when I was 17, and I reconnected with Chelsea. I can't even remember what site I was on at the time, there were so many. But it wasn't that surprising. We only lived about an hour apart, and lots of those platforms matched you with nearby people. When we started talking again, Chelsea admitted she had fallen in love with me. She even told me I broke her heart when I stopped logging into that old account. I felt awful hearing that. I apologized, and she seemed to take it well. Then she asked me if I remembered the relationship we had. That's when things got weird. Relationship? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I only remembered us being friendly, nothing more. I told her just that I thought of her as a friend back then and was glad to catch up now. But she hit me with this. Apparently, we were dating. According to Chelsea, we'd been together for nearly 3 years, talked about getting married, and even planned a future. I felt like my brain stopped. That never happened. I was in a serious relationship with a boyfriend when I was 12, one that lasted until I was nearly 15. He meant so much to me that even after we broke up, his parents didn't approve of us and forced us apart. I still loved him. I would never cheat on him, let alone with someone I barely knew. Instead of arguing, I just said something like, "Wow, I didn't realize you felt that way. I'm sorry." I figured telling Chelsea I needed time to think would smooth things over. For a while, it did. We kept chatting normally for about a week. No more weirdness, just the casual kind of stuff you'd talk about with a friend. Then, after those 7 days, she asked again if we could get back together. At the time, I was single. For some dumb reason, probably curiosity or maybe just boredom, I agreed. I thought, what's the worst that could happen? At first, it seemed okay. For the first 2 weeks, we texted a lot, shared some laughs, and it almost felt like a regular relationship. But then she sent me a picture of an engagement ring. She said she had bought it for me, back when we were supposedly dating. I didn't know how to respond to that. I laughed it off, assuming she was being dramatic or just sentimental. Still, I couldn't shake how bizarre the whole thing was. I already knew this wasn't going to last long, so I decided not to dig into it. What's the point in stirring up drama when I was already half out the door? Things really went off the rails during the second weekend after we got back together. I was heading to my best friend's house, which was over an hour away. Whenever I stayed with her, it was a full weekend thing, leaving Friday, coming home Sunday afternoon. I'd told Chelsea about this ahead of time, letting her know I wouldn't be texting as much. I thought being upfront would keep things smooth. I even told her exactly where I'd be, who I'd be with, and what we were planning to do. Friday night was fine. I sent a couple of texts to Chelsea, but nothing major. Saturday morning came and went without much fuss, but by the evening, things took a sharp turn. Around 8 p.m., her texts started rolling in, one after another. At first, they were casual check-ins, but quickly turned into her asking where I was and who I was with. This would have been fine, except I had already told her all of this. I tried to stay polite. I reminded her I was at my friend's place and that we were just hanging out. I even told her exactly what we were doing at that moment, sitting on swings at the park, talking about everything and nothing. But that wasn't enough for her. The texts turned into calls, and when I didn't pick up right away, the tone of her messages got sharper. She started accusing me of lying, saying I was clearly hiding something from her. At that point, my patience was wearing thin. I wanted to enjoy the weekend with my friend, not deal with Chelsea's paranoia. My friend could tell I was annoyed, and when I told her what was going on, she just shook her head and said, "This girl sounds unhinged." She wasn't wrong. I told her flat out that it wasn't cool for me to stay on the phone while I was spending time with my friend. I promised I'd call her the next night instead. That wasn't good enough for her. She kept pushing, saying I needed to talk to her right then and there. I finally said no and ended the call. I figured that was the end of it for the moment, but I was wrong. She started calling me back immediately, over and over. I must have declined her call at least 20 times before I finally gave in and answered. When I picked up, I asked her what her problem was. She went off, accusing me of ignoring her all weekend and spouting some other nonsense that didn't even make sense. That was my breaking point. I told her, "You know what? I'm done. This isn't worth it. We're over. Don't call me again." Then I hung up. This was before smartphones made it easy to block numbers, so I had no choice but to turn my phone off. For the next couple of weeks, Chelsea didn't let up. She called constantly, sent text after text, filled my inbox with emails, and even tried to contact me through random websites. I blocked her everywhere I could. On the platforms where I couldn't block her, I just ignored her completely. Eventually, she stopped trying. That wasn't the end of it, though. Over the years, she'd pop back up every now and then. Out of the blue, I'd get a message asking how I was doing, like she was just a casual acquaintance catching up. Now, I'm 30 and married to an amazing guy who's the complete opposite of her. The last time she resurfaced was about 7 years ago. Back then, I thought, it's been over a decade since all that happened. Maybe she's changed. So, I gave her the benefit of the doubt and replied. At first, it was fine. She talked about how she was dealing with her own obsessive girlfriend at the time, someone who caused her endless stress. But before long, she was slipping back into her old ways, trying to flirt and acting way too familiar. I quickly realized nothing had really changed. I cut her off again, and haven't spoken to her since. If she never reaches out again, that'll be just fine by me. Honestly, I'd prefer it. Some people are best left in the past, and Chelsea is definitely one of them. A few years ago, I dated a woman named Mia. We went out for around 4 months before calling it quits. The breakup wasn't messy, and we stayed on decent terms. By that, I mean we didn't hang out, but we'd occasionally send texts to check in. I was relieved there weren't any lingering grudges. Everything seemed okay between us. One evening, out of the blue, she messaged me. Mia said she was moving and had some lease issues. Basically, she needed a place to crash for a few days. I hesitated, but figured it wouldn't hurt. I didn't expect it to be comfortable, but I assumed I'd be at work most of the time, so there wouldn't be much interaction. When she arrived, we made small talk, and it wasn't too awkward. She took the couch, and I kept to my room. That first night, after coming home late from work, we exchanged a few words before retreating to our spaces. I stayed in my room, scrolling my phone until I fell asleep around midnight. Normally, I sleep like a rock, but that night I woke up feeling like something wasn't right. The room was pitch black, and for a moment, I thought it was just my imagination. But then I felt it. A presence, close. My stomach tightened as I remembered Mia was there. When I glanced toward the foot of my bed, she was standing there, glaring at me. Her face was twisted with anger, her eyes locked onto mine. It wasn't just anger. It looked like pure hatred. My voice cracked as I asked her if she was okay. She didn't respond, just stared. I sat up, my heart pounding, and she stepped back slightly. I asked again, louder this time, but she still said nothing. She quietly turned around and walked out, closing the door softly behind her. I just sat there for a while, too thrown off to process it. Eventually, I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal and managed to drift back to sleep. Maybe she was sleepwalking? But thinking back, I didn't recall her ever mentioning it when we were dating. The next morning, before heading to work, I decided to bring it up. I told Mia about how she'd been standing in my room during the night, staring at me. She looked genuinely shocked, like she thought I was messing with her. When I asked if she'd ever had a history of sleepwalking, she immediately said no and that she never had. Her reaction left me confused. If it wasn't sleepwalking, then what had I seen? The whole thing felt too vivid to have been a dream, but I couldn't come up with a better explanation. That night, I went to bed uneasy, but I told myself it was a one-off. Around 2 a.m., I woke up again. My heart sank as I instinctively glanced toward the end of the bed, but this time, it was empty. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and tried to calm down. But then I scanned the room and froze. In the doorway, I saw her head peeking around the corner. Her face had that same angry, unsettling expression. She didn't say a word, just watched me. My chest tightened as we locked eyes. After what felt like forever, she slowly backed away, disappearing from view. I sat up, staring at the door, waiting for something else to happen. A couple of minutes passed, and then her face reappeared, still staring at me with that same intensity. This time, I called out her name, my voice shaking. She didn't respond, just backed away again and quietly closed the door. The rest of the night, I barely slept. I was too freaked out to even close my eyes. Thankfully, that was the last night she stayed over. She packed up and left early the next morning. Before she left, I told her everything, including what happened the second night. Again, she seemed genuinely shocked, insisting she didn't know what I was talking about. Even now, years later, I can't make sense of it. I don't know what was going on, but I'm glad it's over. I first connected with Abby online, probably through Instagram after one of her comments popped up on a mutual friend's picture. I replied with a joke. She laughed and sent me a follow request. That was pretty much it at the time. I was dating someone, and so was she, so it felt like no big deal. A few years later, though, when that same friend hosted a barbecue, Abby and I ran into each other again. This time, we were both single, and we clicked instantly. She was everything I could have hoped for. Gorgeous, clever, and hilarious. Her laughter filled the space around her, and I couldn't help but be drawn in. Before I knew it, we We'd been dating for about 8 months. It felt so natural, like one minute we met at the party, and the next we were in this solid relationship. Everything seemed amazing, until she blindsided me with something that shook me to the core. Out of nowhere, Abby dropped the bombshell that she had a child. A kid. How could she keep something like that from me? All those months together, and she never once mentioned her daughter. There were no clues, no pictures of her child on her Instagram, no late-night calls or visits to suggest she was hiding a whole person from me. When she casually said, "Oh, I have a court date for custody of my daughter this week," I just stared at her. "Wait, custody of who?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Abby looked at me like I was the one being strange. "Courtney, my daughter," she said, acting like she had mentioned her a million times before. "You've met her," she insisted. But I hadn't, not even once. Apparently, Courtney had been living with her dad, Mike, the whole time. I couldn't believe she'd been able to keep this secret for so long. I wanted to be there for Abby. I really did. I was falling for her, after all. But the fact she could hide something so important made me question everything. Was I wrong to feel this way? I wasn't sure what was worse, her keeping it from me, or her insistence that she had told me. Our argument that night was loud and bitter, filled with confusion and hurt feelings. The more she doubled down on her version of events, the more uneasy I felt. Eventually I gave in and told Abby I must have just forgotten. I didn't believe it, but I figured it was better to say that than keep arguing. After she calmed down, I asked her about the custody case. She started talking about how horrible Mike was, how he'd controlled her and even been physically violent once. When I asked how he ended up with custody in the first place, she froze. Her face crumbled, and she started sobbing uncontrollably, saying how nothing ever went her way. It hit me then that she'd completely dodged my question, but I let it slide. When the court date finally came, she asked me to go with her as some kind of character witness. I wasn't even sure what that meant in a custody hearing, but I agreed. I dressed up, did my best to look presentable, and sat beside her in the courtroom. It was tense, awkward. At one point, I got called on briefly to confirm who I was and what I did for work. That was it. They told me to stay seated, and if anyone needed me, they'd let me know. No one did. So I just sat there, feeling more out of place by the minute as the case unfolded. Then I heard it. One word from Mike that made my stomach drop. Abuse. The judge echoed it too, and that's when it all started coming out. Apparently, the reason Abby didn't have custody wasn't because of Mike's supposed behavior, but because of hers. There were accusations, documents, and stories I never could have imagined about how she had been violent toward both Mike and Courtney. My head was spinning. This wasn't the Abby I knew, or thought I knew. By the end of it, the decision was clear. Full custody stayed with Mike, and there was no sign Abby would even get partial custody anytime soon. On the drive home, she barely said a word. She just stared out the window, tears streaming down her face. I offered to have her come over so she could vent and let everything out, thinking that's what she needed. She nodded, and we headed to my apartment. The second we got inside, though, everything shifted. I thought she'd cry. Maybe talk things through. Instead, she turned on me, her voice rising until she was screaming. "This is your fault," she yelled. "You ruined everything. I lost my daughter because of you." Her words left me stunned. How could she possibly blame me for this? "How is this my fault?" I shot back, my voice sharp with disbelief. She screamed that I hadn't spoken up, that I didn't tell the judge how much she'd changed, or what a good person she was now. "They didn't ask me anything," I said, trying to keep my composure. "If they had, I would have told them all of that, Abby." But she wasn't listening. Before I could say another word, she slapped me hard across the face, yelling that I should have defended her, that I should have fought for her like a man. The irony hit me like a ton of bricks. She was literally hitting me while screaming about not being abusive. I couldn't even process it in the moment. I just stood there, my face stinging, my mind racing, and told her, calmly but firmly, to leave. That's when she turned venomous. Her voice dropped low as she glared at me, saying I'd regret this, that she would ruin my life. "You need help, Abby," I said, keeping my distance. "I can't be part of this anymore." Her response was chilling. She stared at me with cold eyes and said, "Whatever happens next, it'll be your fault for pushing me to it." And then, she was gone. I stood there for what felt like hours, trying to process what she meant. Was it a threat? A cry for help? At the time, I convinced myself it was just words, empty and meaningless. But 2 days later, the knock on my door proved me dead wrong. When I opened it, 3 police officers were standing there, their faces tense. "Is Abby here?" one of them asked sharply. I froze, confused and a little afraid. "No," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I haven't seen her since—" My words trailed off as they asked to come inside. Normally I'd hesitate, but something about the way they were acting made me step aside without a second thought. 2 officers immediately started searching my apartment, moving methodically from room to room. Meanwhile, the 3rd one asked me to sit down. I complied, my heart pounding as he fired off questions. "When was the last time you saw her?" he asked. I told him about our argument, how she'd been furious after the custody case, and how she'd left after hitting me. His face didn't change as I spoke, and he pressed for more details. Exact times, exact words. I told him everything, even letting him see my phone to prove I hadn't heard from her since that morning at court. I scrolled through my call logs and messages to show him there was nothing from her after that day. That's when I finally asked, "What's going on? Why are you looking for her?" My chest tightened as I waited for his answer, and the silence that followed made my skin crawl. The other officers returned to the living room, their faces serious, and finally started explaining what was going on. They told me I was the last person known to have seen Abby before she went to Mike's house. Apparently, she had shown up there, crying and upset, saying I'd attacked her. For some reason, Mike believed her and let her in. That's when things took a dark turn. Abby grabbed something heavy, knocked him unconscious, and took Courtney. She had been on the run with her daughter ever since. They made it clear they needed to rule me out as an accomplice. I told them everything, about the breakup, about how she'd hit me, and how I told her to leave. I insisted I had nothing to do with her actions. They seemed satisfied but warned me to call them immediately if I heard from her. After they left, I just sat there in shock. How had Abby, this woman I thought I loved, gone from someone I trusted to someone capable of something so terrible? Had I missed all the warning signs? Was I blind to who she really was? Or was she just that good at pretending? That was the last of my involvement. The next day, Abby was caught. She hadn't even left town. She went to her mom's house and tried to convince her that she'd won custody of Courtney. Her mom didn't buy it, though. When the police came to ask questions, they found Abby there and arrested her. Just like that, it was over. Abby was charged, and she's serving time now. I doubt she'll ever be allowed to see Courtney again. Do I feel bad about that? In some ways, yes. No child deserves to grow up without their mother. But on the other hand, Abby's actions showed she wasn't fit to be in Courtney's life. She endangered her own daughter in ways I still can't fully wrap my head around. The silver lining is that Courtney is doing okay. I actually became friends with Mike after everything went down. We bumped into each other at a GameStop, of all places, and ended up talking. Over time, we were able to laugh about how crazy it all was. Now, we hang out sometimes, playing Call of Duty and catching up. Courtney just turned 10, and she's doing great. A smart, happy kid with a bright future ahead of her. It was late October 2017 when I first crossed paths with my ex. We'd started talking on Plenty of Fish, and soon those messages turned into texts and endless late-night calls. Eventually, we decided to meet face-to-face, and from the moment we did, I was hooked. At that time, my weekdays were busy with work, but I spent every weekend with her. We made every effort to be together, and I was convinced we were in love. She said she felt the same, and I believed her. Things moved fast, too fast. Just a month later, we agreed to live together despite our family's strong objections. Everyone warned it was a terrible idea. but I ignored them all. That was my first mistake, and it opened the door to 3 years of torment. By December, less than 2 months after meeting, we had moved into my best friend's place. He lived there with his girlfriend, so space was tight, but we managed for a while. Within a few months, both of us found jobs, and it felt like things were falling into place. We got our own place, full of hope for the future. I thought we were building something real. I couldn't have been more wrong. Fast forward to November 2018. That's when the first major incident happened. We'd just returned from her mom's house after spending Thanksgiving with her family. It was still early in the day, and she had to leave for a night shift at work. Not long after dropping her off, I noticed she'd left her phone behind. I planned to bring it to her right away, but a notification caught my eye. A message from someone she'd once been involved with romantically. I knew it wasn't right, but curiosity got the best of me, and I opened her phone. What I found made my blood boil. Their texts were far from innocent, explicit even. My hands trembled as I gathered all her things and dumped them into the spare room we used for storage. Then I drove to her workplace and waited outside until her shift ended. I confronted her as soon as she walked out. Instead of owning up to her actions, she turned it all around on me. She accused me of invading her privacy, painted me as the villain. My anger was replaced by fear. The thought of losing her overwhelmed me. Against all reason, I forgave her. I should have ended it right there. I promised I'd never touch her phone again, and she swore she'd stop sexting other guys. But that promise didn't mean much. Over the next year, she cheated on me repeatedly. Each time, I let it slide. Her betrayals came with physical and emotional abuse that grew worse with every passing month. Then, one day, she casually floated the idea of us having an open relationship. I said, "Absolutely not," which sparked another nasty fight. A few days later, while I was at work, her mom and sister showed up and helped her pack up her stuff. She was gone by the time I got home. For 2 weeks, I wallowed in misery. I missed her so much, despite everything she'd done. When she finally called, it wasn't to apologize. She said she'd only come back if I agreed to the open relationship. I was at my absolute lowest, and I stupidly gave in. What followed were months of me trying and failing to adjust. Then came the day that nearly broke me completely. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when someone knocked on the door. I opened it to find a guy staring at me with a mix of confusion and anger. He demanded to know who I was and where his girlfriend was. I glanced back into the living room where she lay frozen on the couch, her face pale with dread. "I'm her boyfriend," I told him, my voice cold. "This is my house. You've got 5 seconds to leave." The guy bolted without another word, but his visit left me spiraling. I went to the bedroom, grabbed my shotgun, and returned to the couch. I sat there, loading the weapon with trembling hands, tears streaming down my face. She didn't even seem scared, just stared at me with that same detached expression I'd grown used to. I cocked the gun and pressed it under my chin. That's when she finally reacted, screaming and pleading for me to stop. Her cries snapped me out of it. I lowered the gun, my mind racing with disgust at what I'd almost done. "If we're going to keep doing this open relationship thing," I said shakily, "we need rules." We hashed out some boundaries, but they didn't matter in the end. For a year, I watched her break every rule we'd set. She had her fun while I refused to see anyone else. The lies and manipulation escalated, as did the abuse. My health deteriorated. I lost over 70 pounds and felt like a hollow version of myself. One day, I found out she was seeing someone else again, blatantly disregarding our agreement. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I told her I was done. Done with her. With the lies. With the pain. If I stayed with her, I knew she'd destroy me completely. It's been 7 months since I walked away for good. I've started to rebuild my life. My body and mind are healing, even though loneliness lingers. But I'll take being alone over going back to that nightmare any day. April, wherever you are, I forgive you for the hell you put me through. But for both our sakes, let's make sure we never cross paths again. Last summer, my girlfriend and I ended things. We'd been dating for a few months, but honestly, she was just too demanding for me to handle. After the breakup, she kept calling me, even though I made it clear I wasn't interested in staying in touch. I asked her to stop, but she wouldn't let it go. Her calls and texts kept coming until I had to block her number. About a month later, I came home from work to find one of my front windows completely shattered. Glass was scattered all over the floor. I thought for sure someone had broken in. I grabbed a baseball bat and walked through the house, checking every room, ready to defend myself if needed. But the place was exactly how I left it. Nothing was missing or out of place, and there was no one inside. I ended up paying a small fortune to get the window fixed, thinking that was the end of it. A week went by, and one morning, I headed out to my car to drive to work, only to find all my tires slashed. That's when I realized the window incident wasn't random. My ex-girlfriend was the first person who came to mind. I unblocked her and sent her a message accusing her of vandalizing my house and car. She didn't reply though, which made me even more suspicious. With no car, I had to call a buddy to get me to work that day. Afterward, I went straight to the police to report what had happened. That same night, I woke up to the sound of glass breaking again. My stomach dropped and I thought, not this again. Furious, I grabbed the bat and ran to the living room, only to find another window smashed. I sprinted outside, hoping to catch whoever was doing this, but the street was empty. I called the police again, explaining that it had happened a second time. When they arrived, they looked around and asked a bunch of questions. What they found next shook me to the core. They searched the house thoroughly and eventually went into the basement. A while later, the officers came back upstairs with my ex. She'd been hiding down there the whole time. When I turned 15, I made the awful choice to run away and move in with my boyfriend at the time, Mark, who was 18, along with one of my closest friends, Laura, who was the same age as me, and her boyfriend, Jason, who was 22. Looking back, I can't even count all the reasons this was a terrible plan. But I was a naive kid back then, and it felt exciting, like some kind of rebellious adventure. I was caught up in the rush of the lifestyle these older guys had. My other best friend at the time, Rachel, also 15, was seeing this 21-year-old named Steve, who made a habit of selling magic mushrooms. He'd always give us samples so we could test the strength for him before he priced them. For some reason, I can't even remember now, Laura and Jason were away for the weekend, and Rachel and Steve took over the master bedroom. Steve had brought along this new batch of mushrooms, and there were these white-capped ones that stood out. Those were the ones we decided to try. After a while, my boyfriend and I got frustrated waiting for them to kick in, so we foolishly ate a total of 8 grams together. Big mistake. Not long after that second round, I started tripping, hard. It wasn't the fun, colorful kind of trip either. It was like falling headfirst into a dark, chaotic spiral. Mark, somehow, wasn't feeling anything yet, so he had to watch over me while I was losing it. That hour was like pure hell for me, though I barely remember all the details. Out of desperation, I tried forcing myself to throw up, hoping it might end the nightmare sooner. Meanwhile, Rachel and Steve had already passed out in their room, leaving me and Mark alone in this mess. After I'd been sick and was starting to calm down, we decided to lie down in the dark. That's when his trip began, and things took a sharp, terrifying turn. Mark's trip hit him fast and hard. He started mumbling lyrics from Tool songs like they were some sacred text, repeating them over and over. It should have freaked me out more than it did, but in my foggy state, I just went with it. The strange chanting barely registered as dangerous until it was too late. One moment I was trying to soothe him, telling him it was just the drugs messing with his head, and the next, he was on top of me. His hands clamped around my head, and he started pushing like he was trying to snap my neck. I didn't think I was going to make it out of this alive. While trying to keep him calm, I was silently planning how to escape. He tried to twist my neck 2 more times before I saw even the smallest chance to get away. To this day, I have no clue how I survived because he was strong enough to do it. After his 3rd try, his mood suddenly flipped. Out of nowhere, he decided we needed to get married, right then and there. Completely naked, he He scooped me up and started heading to the bedroom where Steve and Rachel were sleeping, rambling about how one of them could officiate the ceremony. I knew this might be my only chance. As he carried me down the hall, I exploded into action, thrashing and clawing like some kind of cornered animal. I screamed at the top of my lungs, kicking wildly until his grip faltered. Finally, I managed to break free and hit the floor. Without stopping to think, I bolted for the bathroom, slamming the door behind me and locking it. I think I even knocked over a chair on the way to slow him down, but I can't be sure. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would break out of my chest. Behind the door, chaos erupted. I could hear shouting and what sounded like a fight, along with his manic, garbled yelling. Then came a knock on the door, and my blood ran cold. I didn't dare answer. Instead, I frantically worked at the tiny bathroom window, trying to open it and climb out. The knocking continued, louder and more insistent. Minutes passed before I realized it wasn't him, it was Rachel. She was shouting for me to open up and let her in. Without thinking, I unlocked the door. The second it swung open, everything went sideways. My boyfriend had broken free from Steve, who'd been trying to hold him back. He shoved Rachel aside like she weighed nothing and lunged at me. I didn't even have time to react before he tackled me to the bathroom floor. This time, he wasn't holding back. His hands found my neck, twisting my head so violently that I could see the grout lines and tiny cracks in the bathroom tiles behind me. I knew this was it. I was about to die. If Alex hadn't been there, I don't think I'd be alive to tell this story. He managed to pull my boyfriend off me just long enough for Rachel to barge into the bathroom and lock the door behind her. I was completely losing it, crying uncontrollably, covered in bruises and feeling more scared than I'd ever been. Somehow, Rachel stayed focused. She kept telling me we needed to get out of the house immediately. The only clothes I could find were a dirty, oversized black hoodie with some logo on it, and a pair of men's boxers, both crusted with dried vomit. Rachel finally pried the small window open, and we climbed out, smeared in filth and still shaking. We made our way to a nearby friend's place, where I completely fell apart. By the time we got there, I was a sobbing, trembling mess, but I managed to give a basic rundown of what had happened. One of the guys at the apartment, understandably furious, stormed out, yelling that he had to go find my boyfriend. As much as I hated what had happened, I weirdly got it. Even then, I knew the drugs had warped my boyfriend's mind into something unrecognizable, and that this wasn't really who he was. I couldn't bring myself to care much about fairness or justice in that moment. I just wanted to survive. But deep down, I also didn't think he deserved to be abandoned entirely just because of one horrific mistake. Eventually, I managed to calm down a little. I sat on my friend's couch, trying to catch my breath and steady my racing heart. That's when the guy who'd left came back, and, to my shock, he wasn't alone. My boyfriend was with him, wrapped in a black curtain like some kind of cloak. His pupils were huge, and he looked completely unhinged. He sat down next to me, still reeking of sweat and adrenaline, and started apologizing over and over again. I stayed silent, every muscle in my body locked with fear. Then, without warning, he started slipping back into those weird, repetitive thoughts. Through his rambling, I learned the terrifying reason he'd tried to kill me. He thought God had told him to do it so that we could be together in heaven. That broke something in me. I couldn't take it anymore. The fear, the stress, the madness of the whole night. My friends were trying to stay calm, but I could see they were just as uneasy about him being there as I was. I couldn't face another second of it. Without saying a word, I bolted from the couch and ran straight out of the apartment. I didn't stop running until I reached another friend's place nearby. I stayed there for the night, still covered in vomit and tears, too shaken to even clean myself up. That experience left me scarred in ways I'm still figuring out. We broke up a few months later, and he ended up lightly stalking me for a bit before moving to another state. Looking back, I know I could have handled things more carefully, maybe made smarter choices, but I didn't. That night is burned into my memory. a horrible reminder of how a single mistake can ripple through your life. Even now, I try not to think about how much it changed me, but the impact is always there, an ugly shadow I'll never fully escape. I transitioned from female to male years ago, and 6 winters back, I had bottom surgery. The process hit my body hard, leaving behind more problems than I could count. Even before what I'm about to share, things were messy. Up until now, I've gone through around 75 surgeries to fix it all. Back then, I was 24. A year after surgery, I connected with a guy online. He lived far away, but we clicked fast. He was transitioning too. Things were okay with my health at that point, so when he mentioned he was about to lose his home, I told him to come live with me. My roommate agreed to let him crash for a while, giving us a month to figure out where we'd go next. But he wasn't easy to live with. He stirred up arguments between me and her until it got so bad we were both out on the streets. He left to get help from his family, and my service dog and I ended up sleeping in my old SUV. It was freezing, and nights felt endless. Somehow, I found us a place to stay with someone local. Not long after, my ex and I split. Luckily, the apartment had enough space for us to keep our distance. During that time, he got close with this person named Elle. She and I started talking, and I found her easy to be around. She often helped calm the constant tension in the apartment. One day, though, the fighting exploded. I'll admit it, I was the one who snapped first. I screamed at him, tossed some of his stuff into his room, and slammed the door. That set him off. He got in my face, shouting and poking at my trauma, trying to make me lose control. I shoved him lightly, just enough to push him away. He fell back onto his bed. I wasn't strong, still needing a cane because of my surgeries, but he was built. A black belt who hit the gym twice daily. He stepped back, his face twisting with rage, and then kicked me hard between the legs. The pain made me crumble, and as I bent forward, he sank his teeth into my collarbone. At first, I didn't even notice. Adrenaline blurred everything. Then he stormed across the hallway into my room, shoved my air conditioner out the window, and used the opening to leave, shouting about how I was keeping him trapped. I was left shaking. I called Elle, barely able to breathe between sobs, trying to explain what just went down. She showed up soon after and found him sitting casually on the porch steps, grinning like nothing had happened. When she confronted him, asking, "Did you seriously bite them?" He smirked and replied, "I sure did." Elle immediately took me to the hospital. There, a social worker and 2 cops asked for my story. The female officer's response still haunts me. She coldly said that because I had legally changed my gender marker to male and he hadn't yet, they would see me as the aggressor. She warned that if I pressed charges, I'd likely face aggravated assault charges myself. I felt trapped and powerless, so I let it go. Over the next few months, I had to endure 4 surgeries just to fix some of the damage he caused. But it didn't end there. Another fight erupted not long after. This time I called the cops right away. When they arrived, they forced him to leave. A friend of mine was there at the time, and after the officers were gone, she told me the truth. She believed the first officer had lied to me, probably out of transphobia. She pointed out how they kept bringing up my surgery and legal gender marker, twisting things to paint me as the villain. After endless arguments and unbearable tension, we all eventually moved out. But the scars he left, both physical and emotional, didn't disappear. One day, while scrolling through a post about some drama between influencers in our community, I saw a comment from the wife of one of his friends. She brazenly wrote that I deserved everything that happened because my ex beat the hell out of me. Her words dug deep, reopening wounds I was trying to heal. Now, years later, I'm in a healthy and loving relationship, but the damage is far from repaired. I've had countless surgeries to try and fix the injuries he caused. My urethra, bladder, and everything in between. Every day is a battle. I'm on disability now, living with paranoia, crushing anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Dissociation and depersonalization creep in too often, making me feel like a stranger in my own life. Sharing this story has been hard, but it feels important. I've recently started working through the trauma, and it's been one of the toughest things I've ever done. Domestic violence in any form is never okay. And if you ever find yourself in a situation where officials don't take you seriously, don't stop fighting. Find someone who will. If I'd done that, maybe the second attack wouldn't have happened. Stay safe, and don't let anyone silence you. When I was 14, my mom, little brother, and I ended up living with my grandparents. We'd run away from her violent, unhinged husband. Staying at my grandparents' place wasn't ideal, but my mom needed a safe space to heal and regain her strength. My grandma rented out a few trailers and small sheds on her property to people down on their luck, folks who couldn't get a regular lease. Most were quiet and kept to themselves. And then, there was a guy named Steve. Steve had this weird fixation on my mom. He started asking her out not long after we moved in. She made it clear she wasn't interested. She was still dealing with the mess her husband had left behind. But Steve didn't back off. He went from casually asking to pestering, then pleading, and eventually getting angry about it. He didn't understand the word no and started showing up wherever we were. If we waited at the bus stop, Steve would be loitering nearby. When we grabbed food at the diner, he'd be out front, staring in through the windows. Even when I walked to school, I'd feel him trailing me. It got so bad that we had to stop letting my brother walk anywhere alone because Steve started following him too. It didn't stop there. Steve began lurking outside our windows late at night. Every evening, like clockwork, he'd stand out there, muttering to himself. He'd switch between begging my mom to give him a chance, shouting insults, and threatening her. He called her all sorts of things: his angel, his devil, his soulmate. He even tried peeking through the curtains a couple of times. We'd sit together in the dark, terrified to even move, while Steve's voice droned on for hours. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't we call the cops? The answer's simple. My grandma didn't want to get involved. Steve was a paying tenant, and she wasn't about to risk losing that. My grandma made it clear that my mom's problems weren't hers. She valued rent money more than our safety, and if we caused trouble, she'd throw us out. That would mean losing custody of my little brother, and we knew he wouldn't last long alone with our father. So we stayed, trapped in a nightmare we couldn't escape. Then one night, everything shifted. Steve's ranting outside the window took a chilling turn. His voice, which usually bounced between angry and pathetic, grew disturbingly steady. He talked like he'd just solved a puzzle no one else could. He said he understood now. My mom loved him, of course she did. But her kids were in the way. We were the reason they couldn't be together. Calmly, he promised her that he'd take care of everything. She didn't need to worry about us anymore. He'd make sure we were out of the picture so they could finally be together. The next morning, my mom called my stepdad in desperation. Despite their history, she trusted him more than anyone else in that moment. She asked him for advice, hoping he could tell her how to protect us if Steve decided to act on his threats. My stepdad, knowing she wasn't capable of fighting off a stray dog, let alone a dangerous man like Steve, pressed her until she confessed everything. He told her to go back home and stay calm while he handled it. I have no idea what my stepdad said or did, but by the time I got back from school, Steve was gone. He'd left behind most of his things, only taking what he could carry. It was like he vanished overnight. My mom never explained, and honestly, I never asked. All I cared about was that he was gone. Steve, you turned our lives into a waking nightmare. My brother and I have grown up now, and we're not the scared kids we used to be. For your own good, let's keep it that way. I'm a guy from Australia, and this story revolves around my ex-girlfriend. In hindsight, there were always warning signs, but back then, I brushed them off since they seemed minor. Let's call her Jess. I was 20 when I met her, just starting my second year of college, and it was my first serious relationship. I fell hard for her pretty fast. She came across as everything I wanted. She was super attached, but I didn't see it as a problem at first. Jess lived in the same on-campus housing as me, and whenever I visited my family, who were only an hour's drive away, she'd act strange. She'd send me dozens of texts, sometimes close to 60, saying how much she missed me and couldn't wait for me to return. If that didn't work, she'd suddenly have some crisis, like failing a test, and beg me to come back early to comfort her. At the time, I figured she just cared deeply about me. Looking back, those emergencies always seemed suspiciously timed. We started dating just weeks after meeting. By mid-February, she was officially my girlfriend. I didn't think much of how fast it all happened since I'd never had a girlfriend before. We were supposed to have separate rooms in the dorms, but the day we made things official, she decided her room wasn't good enough and moved all her stuff into mine. Sharing my tiny twin bed with her became the new normal. I tried telling her it was uncomfortable, but she'd get upset, saying I was being selfish or unkind. To avoid upsetting her, I just put up with it. I did enjoy having her around most of the time, though even then, I felt like my personal space was vanishing. When summer came, we planned a weekend camping trip. Jess had gone camping a lot with her family, but it was a completely new experience for me. Her birthday fell around the same time, so I got her a perfume gift set from a local drugstore chain called So. She loved their stuff and brought 2 of the perfumes along on our trip. I didn't think twice about it then. The first day went great. We set up camp in a perfect spot and spent the day laughing and just enjoying each other's company. But as night fell, something shifted. Jess tried to make a move, and I wasn't feeling it. I get now that I didn't owe her any explanation, but at the time, I felt awkward and guilty. She pulled away from me like I'd slapped her when I said no, and then she stormed off into the tent without a word. I was confused but decided to let her cool off. I didn't want to upset her, but I wasn't in the mood. It had been a long day, and on top of it, I'd had a headache from the lack of sleep the night before. Too much excitement, I guess. A few minutes later, she came back out of the tent. But now, she was completely naked. I stared at her, confused, and asked what she was doing. She said she was reminding me what I was missing. I felt a pang of guilt, but I tried to explain it wasn't about not being attracted to her. I just wasn't up for it right now. I told her not to take it so personally. She glared at me, her face stone cold, and said she wasn't putting her clothes back on until I gave her what she wanted. I thought she was joking and started to laugh, but it hit me she wasn't. She was dead serious, was dead. My tone shifted, and I told her to knock it off and put her clothes back on. That's when she exploded, shouting about how I was a terrible boyfriend and how rejecting her made her feel worthless. I tried again to explain that it wasn't personal, but the shouting only got worse. Finally, she broke down crying, and I just stood there, dumbfounded. I didn't know what else to do, so I hugged her. The whole thing felt unreal, like I wasn't even in my own body. She apologized through tears, mumbling about being insecure, and I told her it was okay. I wanted to comfort her, even if what had just happened felt really wrong. Eventually, she got dressed again, and we lay there watching the sunset. For a while, things seemed calm, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. Her behavior had been so bizarre, and it made me uncomfortable, though I kept telling myself to just let it go. By the time the sun disappeared, the air was starting to chill. Jess suggested we head into the tent and get some sleep. I agreed, too drained to argue. Inside, I stripped down to my boxers since it wasn't that cold, and as I did, she made another comment about getting closer. I was about to tell her not to start up again when she threw her pillow at me and laughed, telling me to lighten up. Her joke stung. It reminded me of her earlier tantrum, and I couldn't fully shake the unease. Still, I was too tired to overthink it and desperate for rest. As I lay in the dark, the headache that had been nagging me all day started to ease up. That heavy, comforting feeling of falling asleep began to wash over me. For a moment, it felt like bliss. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I woke up gasping for air, my face soaking wet and stinging. The smell of perfume hit me immediately, sharp and overwhelming. My nose felt cold, like someone had poured freezing water into it, and my chest was tight. I flailed around, coughing and spluttering, trying to figure out what was happening. My lungs burned as if I'd inhaled some kind of chemical mist. I tried to scream, but all that came out were panicked, choking noises. I couldn't open my eyes, and I was struggling to breathe. Over the chaos, I heard Jess laughing, her giggles cutting through the panic like nails on a chalkboard. It took me a moment to piece together what was happening. She'd sprayed me directly in the face with perfume. A lot of it, too, because I could feel the mist clinging to my skin, and it felt like gas was filling my sinuses. I was coughing so hard I thought I'd throw up, and I reached blindly for my water bottle, spilling most of it over myself as I tried to rinse my face. I clawed at the tent's zipper, desperate to get out into the fresh air. My eyes were still shut tight, and I couldn't see a thing, but I kept fumbling until I managed to stumble outside. The cool night air hit me like a slap, and I took greedy gulps trying to steady my breathing. My whole body was shaking as I rubbed at my face with one of the blankets we'd brought. For a few horrible moments, I genuinely thought I was about to die in that tent. When the coughing finally eased and I felt like I could breathe again, I turned back toward Jess. She wasn't outside with me, and when I ducked back into the tent, I found her lying down, pretending to be asleep. That's when I snapped. I'm not proud of how loud I shouted, but I couldn't stop myself. I demanded to know what the hell she'd been thinking, my voice hoarse and shaky. At first, she just ignored me, muttering for me to stop yelling at her. That only made me angrier. I shouted again, asking her what she'd done to me and why. Finally, she sat up, looking annoyed, and told me it was just a joke. She said she'd used one of her perfumes to spray my face because she thought it'd be funny to see how long it would take to wake me up. I couldn't believe it. She was actually smiling like this was no big deal. I completely lost it. I yelled that she was insane, that she could have suffocated me with that stuff. Her response? She rolled her eyes and snapped that if I'd just gone along with her earlier, she wouldn't have needed to pull the prank. Hearing that made my stomach churn. It felt like I'd been dropped into some messed up nightmare, the kind you only see in horror movies. We kept yelling at each other, Jess crying and me just done with it all. I wasn't comforting her this time. I grabbed my blanket, stormed out of the tent, and wrapped myself up outside. She didn't follow me, which I was grateful for, but sleep didn't come either. I sat there, wide awake, replaying everything that had happened. My phone barely had any signal, and even though I could have tried calling someone, my parents, maybe a friend, I didn't. I wasn't ready to explain this mess to anyone. Part of me was scared to even try sleeping. What if the perfume had done something serious? What if I stopped breathing in my sleep? I kept telling myself that if it was going to kill me, it would have already. That didn't make it any easier. Eventually, I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, the sun was up. When I woke, Jess was acting like nothing had happened, like everything was perfectly normal. I got dressed in silence, my chest still tight with leftover anger and confusion. Then I told her I was leaving. She looked at me, completely baffled, as if she couldn't understand why I'd even consider it. When I explained I needed time to think about last night, she flipped. She started shouting, accusing me of being a terrible boyfriend, claiming I didn't love her anymore. Her words didn't sting anymore. I was too far gone for that. I told her that if I was such an awful boyfriend, maybe she shouldn't be with me at all. That broke her. She started crying again, but I was done. I packed up everything and loaded the car, telling her to get in. She refused. She screamed, yelled, threw accusations, and I just stood there holding my ground. Eventually, I had to call her mom to let her know what was going on. As I made the call, Jess started banging on the car windows, yelling at me to stop. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She'd never been like this before, never even hinted at being violent. But here she was, unhinged. I didn't leave until her parents showed up. Once they arrived, I drove straight to my parents' house. When I got there, I unloaded most of the story, leaving out the more personal details about the fights and intimacy. It was awkward enough explaining what had happened to my mom and younger siblings. My dad wasn't surprised. He'd never liked Jess much and didn't hold back, telling me she was bad news and that I should end it for good. I knew he was right. I guess, in a way, we'd already broken up when I told her she shouldn't be with me if I was so awful. But hearing him say it made the reality sink in. It was over. It had to be. I did end up going to the hospital to get checked out after the whole perfume incident. The doctor told me I was lucky it hadn't been worse. It could have done serious damage. Hearing that hit me hard. That night, Jess wouldn't stop blowing up my phone, calling over and over, begging me to take her back. I finally answered one call just to tell her we were done. She was screaming so loudly I had to shout over her to make her hear me. The worst part came when the semester started again. We still went to the same college, and it made my life miserable. Thankfully, I didn't have to live with her anymore, but she knew my routine and started showing up everywhere. She'd follow me across campus, trying to corner me and beg for another chance. She plastered her Facebook page with dramatic posts about me, calling me a narcissist and claiming I'd broken her heart. Most people thought she was unhinged, especially after her constant online rants, but it didn't make dealing with her any easier. Some of my guy friends joked about it when I told them the story, but my female friends were horrified. They reminded me how wrong it was for anyone to try to manipulate or pressure someone into intimacy. Jess wasn't even in the same program as me, but it didn't stop her from constantly showing up on campus or at the same places I went to off campus. I stopped going to my favorite bars and changed the time I did my grocery shopping, all just to avoid her. The worst was when she came to my new apartment. She convinced my roommate to let her into the building, and she started begging at my door. We had to call campus security, but she took off before they arrived. I even went to the university support services for help, but they weren't much use. They just told me to avoid her and act like she didn't exist. I couldn't help but feel like they were blaming me, like somehow this was my fault, or maybe they just didn't care. I graduated last year, at 23, and avoided Jess like the plague at the ceremony. As soon as I could, I moved to a new city to get a fresh start. It's only now, after a year, that I've started to process everything that happened. My new girlfriend has been a big help in showing me just how toxic and abusive Jess's behavior was. If there's one thing I've learned, it's to never ignore the red flags. Clinginess isn't cute or romantic, and if a relationship feels like it's moving too fast, it probably is. Trust your gut. No red flag is too small, and if anyone ever tries to guilt or pressure you into something you're not ready for, walk away immediately. I haven't seen or heard from Jess since graduation, and I hope it stays that way. Whatever her issues are, she needs help, and I can only hope she doesn't do to anyone else what she did to me. So, my fiancé has a volatile and unstable ex. Let's call her Megan, and my fiancé's name is Ben. They have mutual restraining orders, and for good reason. Megan lost her temper so badly during their last encounter that Ben's brother had to call the cops. Ben's family warned me early on about her, sharing all the unhinged things they'd seen firsthand. From the start, I knew Megan wasn't just a problem. She was a storm waiting to happen. I had a toddler when Ben and I started dating, my son, barely over a year old then. By the time we were 2 years into our relationship, Megan started blowing up our phones with texts, demanding to know if my son was actually Ben's child. Ben ignored her, refusing to entertain her wild ideas. That's when the stalking started. Megan began parking her car across the street from our house, just watching. From where she sat, she could see into our kitchen and living room. It made my skin crawl. One afternoon, Ben was at work, and I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, there she was, Megan with her eyes blazing. The second she saw me, she screamed, "I need to see him! I need to know if he's Ben's kid!" I tried slamming the door shut, but she wedged her foot into the doorway, stopping it from closing. Just then, my son came padding down the hallway, likely curious from all the commotion. I quickly told him to go back to his room and shut the door, my voice shaking. Meanwhile, Megan kept shouting all kinds of nasty accusations about me and Ben. Somehow I managed to shove her foot out and lock the door. My hands were trembling as I grabbed my phone and called the cops. By the time they arrived, though, she was gone. That night, when Ben got home, we were still talking about the ordeal when we heard another knock. Ben answered, and before he even saw her, Megan's screams echoed from outside. Another call to the police, another disappearance before they showed up. A week later, I took my son and our 2 dogs to a local hiking trail. We loved this spot. It had a small playground where we always played after a hike. As my son laughed on the swings, I noticed our dogo Argentino, Jake, growling toward the parking lot. His focus was unnerving. I called him to me and quickly leashed both him and our other dog. I told my son, 5 more minutes, okay? As I perched on a picnic table, my eyes scanning the parking lot. Within moments, I spotted Megan's car pulling into the lot, and my chest tightened. I knew I had 2 big dogs with me, but Megan's track record made me worry about how this could play out, especially with my son there. Glancing around, I realized the parking lot was deserted except for her car and mine. Trying to stay calm, I called out to my son, "Hey buddy, time to head back. I'll give you a piggyback ride to the car." I unclipped the dogs' leashes, trusting them to stick close, and we made our way to the vehicle. When we reached the car, I quickly scanned the back seat to make sure it was clear. Thankfully, it was empty. I lifted my son into his booster seat and told him to buckle up. As soon as I shut his door, I hit the lock button, a decision I'd later be grateful for. As I was loading the dogs into the back, I heard the faint sound of someone trying the handle of my son's door. My stomach flipped. Both dogs erupted in barks and growls, their fur bristling. Suddenly, Ben's German Shepherd, Luna, leapt out of the trunk before I could shut it, landing between me and Megan like a trained guard. Megan's face twisted in rage as she screamed, "He should have been my son." For a moment I was frozen, unable to process the absurdity of her words. She stood there, shaking with fury, while I tried to gather myself. Finally, I managed to call Luna off and coax her back into the car. I slipped into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and sped out of the lot like my life depended on it. When we got home, Ben was just walking in from work. My son ran straight to him, spilling the whole story in his tiny, panicked voice. A few weeks later, we learned I was pregnant, and we decided it was time to move. We found a farmhouse far out in the countryside, hoping some distance from Megan would bring us peace. For a while it did, but soon after settling in, strange things started happening. One evening, Ben and I were working on his dirt bike in the yard while my son played nearby. Out of nowhere, we heard soft singing coming from the barn. Ben's face went pale. He grabbed my arm and whispered, "Take him inside. Now." I didn't argue. Scooping up my son, I rushed into the house, locking every door and window. As I carried him upstairs, I heard laughter drifting from outside. A chill ran down my spine. I recognized Megan's voice. She was here. I called 911, but our reception was so terrible that I couldn't tell if they even understood me. I repeated our address over and over, praying they'd get the message. By the time I got back outside, the dogs were in a frenzy. Megan stood there in the yard, holding a crowbar. Both dogs had formed a barrier in front of Ben, their growls deep and menacing. Then, without warning, Megan swung the crowbar at Luna. Luna reacted instantly, clamping her powerful jaws onto the metal. The impact tore the crowbar from Megan's grip, and she staggered back, screaming. The sound of her shriek echoed in the stillness, but all I could think was how close she'd come to hurting someone, or worse. Ben was shouting at me to call 911, and I kept yelling back that I already had. It felt like forever as Megan darted around the trucks, playing this twisted game of cat and mouse while we tried to keep a safe distance. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, maybe 15 minutes, the police pulled into the driveway. They didn't hesitate, cuffing her on the spot. Later, Megan's mom called Ben, crying and apologizing. She said Megan had a mental breakdown and wasn't taking her meds, as if that made any of this easier to deal with. About 8 months later, we welcomed our baby boy into the world. That's when things took a darker turn. One night, long after we'd put the kids to bed, I woke up to the sound of muffled barking. Peeking out the window, I saw Megan in the yard, tossing treats toward the dogs to keep them quiet. When that didn't work, she started screaming, "Get up, you lazy bastards! I know you had a baby! Get your asses up!" Ben was out of bed in a flash, and I wasn't far behind. I rushed to block the stairs, my heart racing. No way was I letting her anywhere near my kids. Megan started pounding on the door, and when Ben opened it to confront her, she lunged at him, kicking and flailing. Her voice was shrill as she shrieked, "I'm taking you away! Away from her, away from those kids! We're finally going to have the family we were meant to have!" Ben stayed surprisingly calm, asking me again if I was on the phone with the police. I nodded, clutching the phone as I described the scene to the dispatcher. At some point, Megan pushed past Ben and came straight for me. I barely had time to react before our dog leaped into action, sinking his teeth into her arm. The pain made her stumble, giving Ben just enough time to grab her. I was still recovering from a C-section and couldn't do much but watch as Ben wrestled her toward the door. With one final shove, he got her outside and locked the door behind her. The police arrived minutes later, hauling her off in handcuffs once again. This time, she couldn't blame her behavior on a breakdown. The charges stuck, and she finally faced some real consequences. But even that wasn't the end. 9 months have passed, and now the letters have started. Vile, hateful messages stuffed in our mailbox or taped to the door. One read, "That baby should have been mine. You're living my life, you slut." Another was just pages of unhinged rambling. "We've taken every precaution we can think of. Cameras are mounted on every corner of the house. New locks were installed, ones that bolt shut in a way that feels more secure. I don't leave the house without my mace, and there's always a knife tucked in my bag. Whenever we're out with the boys, we stay hyper-aware, scanning every face and car. I wish I could say I feel safe, but the truth is, we're always on edge. I just hope she gets the help she clearly needs because I don't know how much more of this we can take." I met my ex when I was 20 through a dating app. At the time, I was still trying to find my footing after being cut off by the small Baptist church I had grown up in since I could remember. The reason? I started dating a man who didn't fit their image of the ideal partner. He was black, had long dreadlocks, and was obsessed with heavy metal like Metallica. To them, that made me spiritually incompatible. The rejection hurt, but at that age, I felt like I had no choice but to cling to him. After all, he was the only one who didn't turn his back on me. For the first couple of years, it felt like we had something special, but he often reminded me how naive I was, especially in bed. He'd drop comments that left me questioning if I'd ever measure up to his past experiences. He was 3 years older than me and carried himself like someone who had the world figured out, always talking down to me as if I were a clueless kid. Things started shifting after we hit the 2-year mark. He began staying up late every night, glued to his laptop. At first, I didn't think much of it, but I later discovered he was trading explicit photos with random women online. When I confronted him, his reaction was cold. He just stared at me and asked, "So, are you leaving or not?" I was crushed, but I stayed because, honestly, I thought I didn't have anyone else. He told me he believed we were soulmates, but claimed he hadn't gotten the chance to live his wild years. In other words, he wanted to sleep with other women while still keeping me around. It shattered me, but instead of leaving, I let him drag me into his idea of a swinging lifestyle. He set up the meetings, picked out my outfits, and even pretended to be me in the online chats to arrange hookups. When the actual meetups happened, they were disasters. He couldn't perform, and somehow that was my fault too. He'd accuse me of not being exciting enough, or say I made him feel inadequate. At this point, it felt like I was in a daze, agreeing to anything he suggested, just to keep the peace. I know it sounds insane, but back then, I couldn't see a way out. He made me believe that everyone in my life, my friends, my family, didn't truly care about me or my choices. He had this way of twisting things, always making it seem like he was the only one who really wanted the best for me. His words were calculated, designed to cut just enough to make me doubt myself. Before I knew it, I wasn't just his girlfriend. I was more like something he owned, something to show off. He took control of how I dressed, deciding what I could and couldn't wear. And then it escalated. He started setting up meetings with strangers, men I didn't even know, and insisted I take photos and videos of these encounters for him. I wasn't that kind of person. I never had been. I was always the type to be loyal to one person, and the thought of doing what he asked made me sick. But he had a way of making me feel like I had no choice. Speaking up would mean I didn't trust him, and I was desperate to hold on to what little of our relationship felt normal. So, I went along with it. Each time, my anxiety would spiral out of control, and I'd be on the verge of a breakdown, terrified of what I was walking into. One time, after a date, the guy claimed to have recorded everything for me, but ended up filming nothing but the wall. That's when he hit me for the first time. From then on, I shut down. I had to. I learned to detach myself from my own life, to put on this other version of me that could survive whatever he wanted. At home, I tried to hold on to the person I used to be, but it was slipping away. Then one night, everything hit a new low. He set up another date, but this time, he told me he'd quit his job. I couldn't believe it. Who quits their job without even talking to their partner? I didn't understand. That night, the man I was sent to meet wasn't someone I'd ever choose to be around. He was older, sleazy, and offered $200 to sleep with me. I felt like I wasn't even awake, like I was stuck in some nightmare I couldn't get out of. When I got home and confronted him about what had just happened, he didn't even flinch. He told me it was my turn to step up, to support us. Rent was coming up, and we had barely $30 in our account. I was trapped. I felt like I was stuck, like there was no way out. For almost 6 months, he controlled every part of my life. He'd dress me up in lingerie, take pictures of me in degrading positions, and post them on escort sites using a fake name. He handled all the messaging, set up appointments, and decided who I'd meet. I never saw a dime of the money. After every weekend, he'd take me out for a nice dinner to say thanks, then stash the rest to pour into fixing up his clunky 1973 Camaro. Every time I tried to protest, he'd remind me that we needed the money. There were nights I'd just curl up in bed, sobbing quietly into my pillow. I'd tell myself over and over that I couldn't keep living like this. But his voice was always there, echoing in my head, making me feel like I had no choice. He wasn't the man I thought I'd fallen in love with. He was cold, manipulative, and terrifying. The last client I ever met was a cop. Somehow, they knew about him. They'd seen him waiting in the hotel lobby while I was upstairs. The officer pulled me aside, separated me from him, and begged me to tell them the truth about what was going on. But I lied. I said I was a willing participant because I didn't trust them. Growing up, I was taught never to involve the police, never to be a snitch. That lie cost me. I ended up with a misdemeanor for prostitution. 2 weeks later, while he was working a shift at his new restaurant job, I packed everything I owned and left. I went back to my family. That was in 2015. Now my life is different. I'm married, with 3 kids, and a career I've worked hard to build. But a few weeks ago I discovered videos he uploaded to porn sites back in 2015. One of them, with my face clearly visible, has over 500,000 views. That video was something private, something I never agreed to share. And now, I'm terrified. I don't want my husband, my kids, or my 3 brothers to ever find out. I don't know what to do. Can I still press charges for sex trafficking after all this time? This happened in Georgia, and I don't even know if there's a legal path forward. He's living in another state now, married, and has me blocked on everything. But I can still see his wife's page. Every time I think about reaching out, I freeze. He stole so much from me. My sense of safety, my dignity. And now it feels like he's stolen my peace all over again. What would you do if you were me? How do I make this right? Please, I need advice. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around if you're still here. If you're new or haven't done so yet, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future episodes. If you've got your own creepy story about an ex that you'd like to share, don't hesitate to send it to my email. Hopefully, this episode gave you the chills you were looking for. Whether it's an ex who just can't take a hint, or one who still haunts your thoughts in the most unsettling ways, I hope this episode makes you think twice before you ever let someone too close again. Take care, stay safe, and if you're dealing with a creepy ex, make sure you've got those boundaries in place. See you in the next episode. Cheers.